From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 175, recorded on September 3rd, 2019. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today here in a sunny New York City, Dickson Despommier.
Good afternoon, Vincent.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
And from a remote
Wait a minute.
location,
Welcome back from where?
Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Daniel. So welcome back. You got to tell the people
Well, I
where
wanted to bring Daniel in
Well,
first,
okay. I thought we were going to converse.
because if I didn't, you would have interrupted and said, hello, Daniel.
Instead of just now.
I can't win.
There's no winning with Dickson.
Well,
Daniel,
Dickson doesn't win either, though.
Daniel, sometimes I feel there's no winning, period.
That's right. No matter where you look, right?
Tough world. Dickson, tell us where you were.
I was in Romania.
Which is why for all of August we did not do a TWiP, right?
That's correct.
It seems to have resulted in lots of emails, which is good.
That's right.
It did.
You got a lot of guesses.
This is good. And I was attending the International Commission on Trichinellosis, which is held every 4 years at a different place every 4 years. And this was Romania's time to hold the meeting.
Very good.
And it's 60 years since the first.
How many people were at this meeting?
We had about 125.
And that's the world's cadre of Trichinello.
It's unfortunate.
research.
There used to be more, but the granting agencies have not seen fit to continue support for a lot of us. That's the reason why I got out of it.
It's too bad.
It is too bad. It's a very sad thing. They're very enthusiastic people, a lot of young people, a lot of, I saw a few old friends. I met a lot of new friends. I had a great time, actually. It's fun. I was reliving my research years.
Give a research talk?
No, I talked to them about the development of new cities and how they should behave.
They wanted to hear about that?
They did.
Oh, not Trichinello.
No, the president of the society, she asked, this is Joka van de Giesen, asked me to give a talk about vertical farming. So I did. And they liked it. They didn't just like it. They were appreciative.
Wow, very good.
Yep.
All right. Time to get back into science here.
Indeed.
It's September. It's academic.
It is.
Back to school.
That's right.
Daniel, tell us about our last case.
Certainly. The case from TWiP 174, for those of you tuning in for the first time or those tuning back in, we presented the case of a 12-year-old male living in a refugee camp after fleeing the Sudan. And he presented to the doctor with a history of fever for many months. These were described as about every other day. Associated with this was chronic abdominal pain. The camp doctors there, actually my friend Sam, tried to treat him initially with anti-malarials. This didn't have any benefit. They tried broad-spectrum antibiotics, didn't have any effect. And we gave a few more clues. We mentioned that he had a fast heart rate, that his lungs were clear, and he had both an enlarged liver and an enlarged palpable spleen. Now, the camp had very limited resources. They had very limited diagnostic tests. So at this point, what they tried to do was an empiric trial of intravenous amphotericin, which they did, and the child then improves. And so I leave everyone with that.
Well, we had a bunch of guesses.
We certainly did.
First one is from Evan, who writes, I write to posit my guess at episode 174's mystery case based upon the patient's location and symptoms, as well as that of the other children in the refugee camp. I would suspect the patient has visceral Leishmaniasis. The recurring fever initially made me think of malaria, but the cycle in this case is far shorter, and anti-malarial drugs failed to relieve symptoms. However, the enlarged liver and spleen could be indicative of a Leishmania infection. The location is endemic for Leishmania, and an open-air camp would give the sandfly vector ample access to unfortunate people. Amphotericin is an effective drug against Leishmaniasis and proved to work in the case of these children. First time writing in. Hope I'm not proven too wrong. I just began my MD PhD program at the University of Virginia and hope to further explore infectious diseases. Thank you for the amazing and informative podcasts.
Wow.
Well, welcome.
Indeed.
Well, welcome to the writing in part. Anyway, it sounds like you've been listening.
Right. That's a good place for infectious diseases, by the way.
To get them or to study them?
No, to study them. This guy by the name of Petrie, who was there, I hope he's still there, and worked on Entamoeba histolytica for many, many years.
Did he invent the Petri dish?
No, he didn't. He's not that old.
Daniel, can you take the next one?
Sure. That was my first thought. Was whether he invented the Petri dish.
No, he didn't.
Caleb writes, greetings, Doctors Racaniello, Despommier, and Griffin. My case guess for the 12-year-old male living in a refugee camp after fleeing Sudan is visceral leishmaniasis, also known as Kala-Azar or black fever. As a medical and veterinary entomologist, I appreciate cases that involve insects as vectors of the parasites. When Dr. Griffin started the history of recurrent fevers, my initial response was malaria. But after hearing that the anti-malarials failed, and the key words of enlarged liver and enlarged palpable spleen or hepatosplenomegaly, Leishmaniasis became the only parasitic option in my mind. Only with a quick Google search of IV amphotericin and Leishmaniasis, which turned up liposomal amphotericin B, has been used with increasing frequency to treat visceral leishmaniasis. My diagnosis was confirmed. I appreciate all the hard work you all put into each podcast and the entertainment you provide. Caleb Hubbard, PhD candidate, medical and veterinary entomology, University of California, Riverside.
Nice. Very nice. Now, Daniel, you shouldn't have written in, but I'll read this one anyway. It says, Daniel writes, honored professors, the temperature is 75 degrees F and mostly sunny in Goshen, Indiana, the land of milk and honey. I am a long-time listener and first-time writer. Thanks for your outstanding podcast and ongoing educational efforts. My guess for case from episode number 174 is visceral leishmaniasis. I have inserted a somewhat old abstract related to the Sudan and visceral leishmaniasis. I do think the empiric trial of anti-malarial therapy made sense. Unfortunately, patients around the world don't have the advanced diagnostic tests that we have in the United States, so I'm glad that the subsequent empiric amphotericin B therapy was successful. I may have missed it from an earlier podcast, but I would be very interested in how Dr. Griffin balances his clinical academic work and world travel. Signed, Dan.
Yes.
And then he gives a reference.
Did we talk about that once before?
We might have, but it keeps changing. He keeps getting busier and busier. So
yeah, I don't know how I balance it.
How do you?
I got the text this morning from my wife. Wait, I just looked at the calendar. There's Panama, there's Uganda, there's Ghana. I was like, oh, we'll talk later.
When I get back.
Right.
Exactly. When I get
I have similar, I'm not even a doc and I get similar issues. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we all do.
Peter writes, Dear Doctors TWiP, long-time listener, first-time guesser. Well, look at this. We have three first-time.
I should go away more often.
Amazing. Also, long-time bioinformatician, somewhat newer pathogen hunter.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect the boy whose disease was described in TWiP 174 is suffering from visceral leishmaniasis. From the description in Parasitic Diseases 7, enlarged spleen and liver hepatosplenomegaly is a symptom of this disease. However, PD7 goes on to state that onset of disease is accompanied by high fever, which may be irregular, often giving rise to a characteristic double daily spike.
Mm-hmm.
That's like your coffee, double daily spike of coffee.
Exactly.
Whereas the patient reported a fever every second day. I will rely on the description of fever as irregular, though, to explain this discrepancy. Finally, Dr. Griffin mentioned that treatment with amphotericin appeared to relieve the symptoms. Again, looking at PD7, Amphotericin is only mentioned in the treatment of VL and without much success in the treatment of N. fowleri infection. But since this case has none of the CNS symptoms of Naegleria fowleri, I remain persuaded that this is a case of visceral Leishmaniasis. In addition, Zylstra and El Hassan report that from the early 1900s, visceral Leishmaniasis has been among the most important health problems in Sudan, particularly in the main endemic area in the eastern and central regions, and the very regions the authors name have been sites of conflict in Sudan, and thus a likely origin for this unfortunate boy. Besides references more commonly to the cutaneous form to Leishmaniasis on TWiP, I can credit my knowledge of Leishmaniasis to conversations with Dr. Dan Masiga of ICIPE in Nairobi, Kenya. You can read more about their excellent work in building endogenous East African capacity in managing neglected tropical diseases. He provides a reference. Right. 3 diseases listed in PD7 are also associated with splenomegaly, and I list them here as an attempt at differential. The differential is complicated by the widespread prevalence of fever-causing parasitic diseases in the region. One, malaria, but it was reported that antimalarials were administered with no effect. P. malariae, which is associated with splenomegaly, has, however, been found with antimalarial drug resistance, so this lack of response is not necessarily definitive. 2, acute stage of African trypanosomiasis, but no joint pain was reported. 3, visceral larva migrans, but no lower respiratory systems reported. 4, schistosomiasis, but no diarrhea reported. 5, non-parasitic diseases. Syphilis, but antibiotics had no effect, and it also seems unusual for a 12-year-old boy, and hepatitis C, but low prevalence in Sudan and no muscle pain reported. I both work and am a student at the South African National Bioinformatics Institute in Cape Town, South Africa.
Nice.
Weather today is cold, 14C, 57F, and somewhat cloudy, but with no rain.
Wow.
Nice.
Very nice.
Thank you very much, Peter.
ICP, that's the International Center for Insect. And then I forget what the PE stood for, but I knew the person who helped found it, George Craig, who was a famous medical entomologist at the University of Notre Dame when I was a student there. He's remained famous after I left also, helped to form the ICP, which is in Nairobi. And they have great need for that because they have a trypanosomiasis center there too, called ILRAD. And they hooked up the ICP with the ILRAD because trypanosomiasis is a vector-borne disease as well. International
Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology.
Yeah, exactly right. I forgot those last two.
And would you like to know ILRAD?
Well, the International Laboratory for Research on Animal Diseases.
Excellent.
Yeah, I had the privilege of visiting that the 3rd year it opened or something like that.
You're next.
I am. I know. I'm moving my scroller up. Adam writes, Good morning, TWiP'ers. I have recently discovered this fantastic podcast, and I thoroughly enjoy the case studies. This is the first time that I've been able to write in my case diagnosis prior to the next TWiP episode. I've recently started my internal medicine residency with a goal to continue on to an infectious disease fellowship in the future. Needless to say, your podcast has helped fill the doldrums of residency while simultaneously filling my need for interesting infectious disease cases, so please keep up the great work. The case of the 12-year-old Sudan boy with fever and hepatosplenomegaly is a curious one, but I think I have the correct diagnosis. In short, we have a boy with chronic undulating fevers, chronic abdominal pain, hepatosplenomegaly, and improvement in symptoms with treatment with amphotericin B. Initially, my thought process was that common things are common. Undulating fever in a patient in Africa is malaria until proven otherwise, in my opinion. Yet in this case, there was no improvement with antimalarials. Of course, they didn't say which antimalarials. My next thought was that this could be a presentation of human African trypanosomiasis, or HAT, also known as African sleeping sickness. Patients will often present with undulating fevers, can have hepatosplenomegaly along with some associated abdominal pain early in the infection. With a long incubation period, this could account for the chronicity in the 12-year-old boy. The issue with this diagnosis is that the boy had no neurologic symptoms, and the treatment for HAT is suramin in an acute infection and millarciprol in more severe infections with neurologic involvement, which our patient did not receive. This then brought me to what I believe to be the diagnosis, visceral leishmaniasis. My only hesitation is that just a few TWiP'ers ago, the case study was of cutaneous leishmaniasis. But if the boot fits, then wear it in order to avoid sandfly bites. Visceral leishmaniasis is spread by the sandfly, as was explained in the previous TWiP'ers. 2 species exist that cause visceral leishmaniasis, L. donovani and L. infantum. In our patient's case, I believe him to be infected with the donovani species given his location. However, from my reading, the species does not necessarily need to be distinguished. In any case, visceral leishmaniasis often presents with fever, sometimes undulating, hepatosplenomegaly, and pancytopenia due to a bone marrow involvement. I can only speculate that the boy's abdominal pain is due to his now enlarged spleen and perhaps liver. One pathognomonic phrase or sign seen with visceral leishmaniasis is kala azar, and it is why it is sometimes called black fever. This, of course, is referring to the darkening of the skin of those infected. However, this is really only seen in South Asia and is only present in about 20% of the time. Definitive diagnosis of the disease is done via bone marrow aspirate showing amastigotes. Treatment, of course, would include amphotericin, but also could include stibogluconate sodium, or sodium stibogluconate. Thank you again for the great podcast, and I look forward to hearing the resolution of this case on the next episode. Adam. From Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Ever been there?
Yes, I actually have, because I went to Notre Dame for my PhD, and I did a lot of traveling while I was a student, and did happen to travel through Kalamazoo.
There's a pharmaceutical company there, right?
There is. I think it was Park Davis.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, Kalamazoo is also famous for a song by Glenn Miller. It is. They mentioned the name of that town.
Up John. Up John.
Up John. It was Up John. Okay, fine.
Boy.
Up John.
Daniel, you're next.
Lauren writes, hello, Daniel, Dickson, and Vincent. Case study for TWiP 174 for the patient, a 12-year-old refugee with a history of fevers every other day for many months. Utilizing the free PDF of Parasitic Diseases 7th edition, I started to look up what was effective. Using Control F to search for amphotericin, the results were 26 hits, but 5 species, yet 2 phylum, protozoa, and amoeba. With the short list, I went to Parasites Without Borders webpage to watch Parasitic Diseases lectures on protozoa and parasites. Once there, I watched lectures on the 5 species of parasites.
Cool.
My differential: Balamuthia mandrillaris, Naegleria fowleri, malaria, cutaneous and visceral leishmaniasis. PD7 posted that both Balamuthia mandrillaris, Naegleria fowleri could be found in the perfunctorily named protozoans of minor medical importance. Can you guys explain the reasoning for the naming of minor medical importance? Is this due to the low incidence of disease numbers cases corresponding to the PWB lectures 18 number? Actually, I think in the PD7th, we've renamed these to, actually, let me grab, what do we call them? Less common?
I think
because
so.
we felt like it was a little bit dismissive. So let me see what we renamed them. Other protozoa of medical importance. So we changed it to other. So let me go back up. Yeah. I hit my keyboard when I pulled out my
We meant
thing.
no offense to the others.
It's good because it's not minor to the one who has it.
Exactly.
No, and people brought that up.
They certainly did.
So we responded.
Right.
Both B. mandrillaris and N. fowleri were consistent with our patient's symptoms because he lacks CNS involvement or the pathogen is not found in the region. For malaria, I did not disregard due to the possibility for resistance to anti-malarial medication. Listening for case studies and cutaneous even easier to diagnose. Listening to TWiP in the past, cutaneous and mucocutaneous leishmaniasis has been frequent for case studies and cutaneous even easier to diagnose. The key to identifying cutaneous leishmaniasis are the 3 nons: non-tender, non-undermined, non-healing ulcer. But what of old world visceral leishmaniasis? I remember seeing pictures of splenomegaly. I knew the correlation of liver damage and fever, so I'm glad I checked leishmaniasis out anyway. The case study example for PWB was extraordinarily similar to our case study of the 12-year-old South Sudanese refugee. Diagnosis: visceral leishmaniasis by an old world Leishmania donovani, consistent with splenomegaly and hepatomegaly. Chronic fevers occurring every other day, 80% mortality if untreated, and found in the Sudan and southern Sudan. To confirm if there were resources, aspirating the spleen, not recommended, needlessly dangerous, flow cytometry of bone marrow antigen tests, and the preferred method of RK39 dipstick, normally widely available and not as invasive. Treatment: continued treatment of, and as much comfort as can be provided in the severely underserved setting for recuperation. Look out for post-Kala-Azar dermal leishmaniasis within 6 months, ? Not sure of correlation with age of the patient or of the disease. Prevention will be difficult. I'm not just talking about stopping sandflies from spreading leishmaniasis, nor obtaining necessities for this refugee camp, but the cause of the long-term instability of the region. What one needs for prevention is the prevention of patients being bitten from sandflies, and subsequently others from being bitten by sandflies. Protective clothing, bed netting, personal and area insecticide, avoiding areas and times of day that the sandflies are active. It's hard to stay indoors when there's no doors to stay in. It's hard to get protective covering when there's no protection. Uncertainty is what you need to prevent. South Sudan has been both blessed and cursed with rich geologic resources. The following is sloppily paraphrased from Human Rights Watch on South Sudan. Improvements. In July, the UN imposed an arms embargo. Leaders are subject to individual sanctions. The bad. Leaders on all sides are operating with impunity. Warring parties continue to restrict access for the UN and humanitarian groups. The government has become increasingly intolerant and repressive. Civilians have been killed, often because of their ethnicity or perceived political alliances. Civilian infrastructure has been looted and destroyed. Regrettable yet understandable when you consider the vast reserves of petroleum and valuable metal ores South Sudan has. South Sudan needs to diversify their economy any way that the citizens would be more valuable as the workforce than the commercial value of petroleum and ore. Something better paying and economically secure than traditional agriculture, and maybe some kind of global futures market that would benefit from successful healthcare and disease prevention in South Sudan. Thank you, Vincent, Daniel, and Dickson. Sincerely, Lauren Hall. P.S. Disclaimer: I'm not trying to be offensive to Sudanese or South Sudanese peoples, but trying to offer some alternative ideas.
Very good.
All right. Octavio writes, esteemed professors, as Professor Griffin was telling the tale of the 12-year-old boy, I instantly remembered some papers from the Médecins Sans Frontières, the Human Rights Watch, and the UN Office for Humanitarian Affairs I read some years ago, telling the tragic story of Nuer, Leek, and Dinka people of South Sudan in the region around the River of the Gazelles, Bahr al-Ghazal, and the White Nile during the early 1980s, describing a grim circus of violence, displacement, famine, disease, and death. There were several articles on the newspapers during those years up to the early 1990s, where stories such as those of the villages where half to 5/4 of the population died made of the short-term impact and happens whenever such a story of chronic emergency gets to us. All over the continent, the story never changes much. In this area of the Unity Province, a very ironic name indeed, the tribal rivalries served as a good way to fuel territorial claims in this resource-rich land. Cattle raisers were deprived of their animals, homes were burned, people murdered, and survivors moved to different areas in search of food and places to hide from raids. Frequently, bushland areas of acacia and balantites where some foraging could be done yet. As people moved from the Jikani area south of the El Ghazal River towards north and east during the to early to mid 1980s, they carried the same disease the 12-year-old boy of the case had. It's estimated that more than 100,000 people had died from it since 1984. The spread of the pathogen caused it to result from the dissemination of the vector insect due to the expansion of the acacia forests caused by reduced cattle grazing. That's interesting ecology. The introduction of the parasite by military, militia, and a myriad of more or less organized armed groups moving between Ethiopia and Sudan in the mid-1980s, and also a very important factor was the high susceptibility to the infection caused by mass starvation, non-existence of healthcare facilities, and the attacks on the ones installed by humanitarian services. It is a story that could illustrate John of Patmos' apocalypse, where the four horsemen, war, pestilence, famine, and disease, seem to ride in circles in this land for almost 40 years now. It's easy to see in Google Earth, even today, the scars caused by artillery shelling in vast areas of those provinces. Just look for a settlement as Lear or Bentiu and zoom in. One would see the land peppered with thousands of impact craters. The disease is Kala-Azar, or visceral Leishmaniasis, caused by several strains of Leishmania donovani. The transmission is by phlebotomus orientalis. Many patients develop post-Kala-Azar dermal Leishmaniasis, or Leishmanoid, as it's sometimes called also. The search for a vaccine carries on, and I have evolved from whole irradiated live parasites to the use of antigens as Leash-F in the form of DNA vaccines or microbial vectors. Unfortunately, the progress has been slow, and the very important adjuvant factor of peace and stability in the area has also been an objective difficult to reach. I hope the boy got well and was, at the end, a good story in the middle of all this decades-lasting tragedy. Thank you very much for your remarkable work, spreading the word of science. Gratefully yours, Octavio, from Portugal. And he's a veterinarian. It's a lovely letter. It's very depressing, of course, but a lot of people have personal experience with this area. And it's mostly sad stories.
It's really fascinating, though. Our email writers add so much to the show, I think, by introducing this history and the whole ecology aspect.
That's right. The fact that the cattle were chased out, allowing the acacia trees to grow back, providing habitat for the phlebotomous flies, and then putting a bunch of people that shouldn't be there to begin with. It's tragedy. It's really tragedy. We create these things, don't we?
Aaron writes, "Hi, TWiP team. I wanted to write in with a comment on this week's episode 174, Fat Cat, and a case guess while I'm at it. I really appreciated the great discussion on toxo and cats. As a veterinarian, it's something I deal with a lot. You'd mentioned wondering whether cats experience the same problems in pregnancy as humans do when infected with toxo. While the research on this is slim, there is at least some evidence that, yes, new toxo infection while pregnant is bad for cats and their fetal kittens. I attach a good recent review that goes over some of this evidence, and their summary is, quote, kittens born to queens infected with T. gondii during gestation can become infected transplacentally or via suckling. In general, clinical illness is common, and severity varies with the stage of gestation at the time of infection, end quote. So I guess cats shouldn't clean the litter box either.
Dear.
Also, in relation to the cat toxo discussion, just to speak for the cats infected by toxo can become seriously ill from their toxo, while often initial infection leads to nothing but mild GI signs. And as you mentioned, cats that harbor latent infections can become clinically ill if their immune systems are compromised. But there are also reports of normal, healthy cats developing systemic manifestations of toxoplasmosis. Whether disease manifestation in these cases is related to toxo strain, co-infection, infective dose, etc., seems to be still unknown. I can attest to this with some cases I've seen myself, though, of otherwise healthy cats developing serious pulmonary, neurologic, or ocular disease from toxoplasma infection. Finally, switching gears, my case guess. I think in this case, the doctor who prescribed the amphotericin B as a treatment trial for this boy was suspecting visceral Leishmaniasis. Based on PD7, typical symptoms of VL include intermittent fevers and hepatosplenomegaly, and according to the WHO, VL is endemic in that area of East Africa. Amphotericin liposomal is the treatment of choice for VL in India. And so if available in the resource-limited setting described, would be a good option for a treatment trial. Thanks for a great show, and sorry for the long email. No worries.
No, it's a good one.
Daniel.
Kevin writes, this is from Kevin Carney, Chicago. 12-year-old Sudanese boy, sort of summarizes it here. Multiple risk factors and clinical clues coalesce here to lead to a diagnosis. Patient age, child, geographic location, gender, socioeconomic status, poverty-stricken refugee, presumed poor nutrition, as well as fevers and hepatosplenomegaly beat a path directly to a presumptive diagnosis of visceral leishmaniasis. Of course, other common diseases in the region must be considered, such as malaria, tuberculosis, schistosomiasis. Intercurrent illnesses such as dysentery and pneumonia must also be borne in mind. The fact that amphotericin resulted in a rapid resolution of symptoms is another strong indicator that our patient had Kala-Azar. A tidy clinical definition of Kala-Azar is given in the 7th edition of Manson's Tropical Diseases, 1923. An infective disease characterized by chronicity, irregular fever, enlargement of the spleen and often of the liver, the presence in these and other organs of Leishmania donovani, emaciation, anemia, leukopenia, and relative increase of large mononuclear leukocytes, frequently a peculiar hyperpigmentation of the skin, and a high mortality. The case is refreshing due to being stripped down to its clinical essentials, where we are bereft of the glories of technology and must fall back on our now oft derided sensory and intellectual skills. I am compelled to quote another golden oldie, to wit, Castellani and Chambers' 3rd edition of Manual of Tropical Diseases. This is 1920. A systemic clinical examination of every patient is most essential. It is the sum of the various symptoms, none alone pathognomonic, which establishes the diagnosis in conjunction with which the results from the laboratory must be considered. A practitioner who is unable to come to some sort of a diagnosis without the aid of a laboratory should, in our opinion, utilize his earliest spare moments in a course of postgraduate instruction with regard to clinical methods. The history of Kala-Azar is quite interesting and colorful and has been beautifully reviewed by Steberding in 2017. A few tidbits can be found in my endnotes. Diagnosis and treatment of Kala-Azar is well described in PD6. In brief, though, the gold standard of diagnosis is demonstration of a mastigotes in infected tissue. DNA and immunological methods have largely replaced histopathology. Treatment is critical since mortality rates can be as high as 95 to 100% in untreated disease. There are multiple treatment strategies, and according to the WHO, the treatment of leishmaniasis depends on several factors, including type of disease, concomitant pathologies, parasite species, and geographic location. WHO Technical Report 949 states that the pentavalent antimonials have been standard first-line therapy for 70 years. Though resistance has been demonstrated in some areas, the WHO 949 states that cure rates of 93% have been demonstrated with antimonials. The Federal Ministry of Health for the Republic of Sudan's 2014 report states that first-line therapy is a combination of sodium stibogluconate and pathognomonic. Liposomal amphotericin is listed as a second-line treatment. Out of respect for the listener's patience, I have buried my obsessive digressions in the endnotes. Suffice to say that my superannuation slapped me in the face when I began to fiddle about the terms reticuloendothelial system. Then there's my obligatory sniffing around the etymology of Kala-Azar, with all due respect to PD6's well-crafted explanation. And lastly, I wanted to explore Dr. Griffin's intriguing comment during TWiP 173, referring to a form of echinococcus with malignant characteristics. Thanking the TWiP professors, you are not twipping a dead horse. Carry on.
Twipping a dead horse.
Okay. And actually, so I'm going to just pick a few things out because I spent a lot of time going through the Kala-Azar etymology when we were doing PD6. And so he mentions here that Kala-Azar, the that comes from the Assamese word. So Assam, if people remember, is that northeast part of India.
Right.
Black disease, according to OED. Castellani's text notes that Ross states that the correct name is Kala Jwar, Jwar, black or mortal sickness. Though the quotation suggests that the name derives from the associated hyperpigmentation of the skin, it seems possible that the word black might be metaphorical rather than descriptive. And other names for the disease: dum-dum fever, Sahib's disease, cachectic fever, tropical splenomegaly, non-malarial remittent fever, or Sakari's disease.
Wow.
All right. And he's got a lot in here for the show notes.
Yeah, he talks about the reticuloendothelial system. This is interesting. Parasitological martyrs.
Right.
Got an illustration. And then a bunch of words about fever.
Exactly.
Fever terms.
Right.
Like double quotidian, malignant tertian, erratic fever, drug fever.
Yep.
This is great.
Yep.
And a movie recommendation.
Right.
This TWiP case location moves me to recommend a fantastic and heartbreaking documentary that is about a solo American physician working in the remote and war-ravaged Nuba region of the Sudan. Measles, malaria, and many other scenarios not unfamiliar to listeners of the Twix family. The Heart of Nuba, $2.99 on Amazon. And then Terminal Curiosities. He talks about this comment on echinococcus with cancer-like behavior. And he found some other cases that he talked about. And so he explored it.
Interesting.
He's got one here in the Journal of Medical Case Reports. Disseminated alveolar echinococcosis resembling metastatic malignancy.
Indeed.
So I highly recommend that you check it out. It's really wonderful. And you will find them in the show notes at microbe.tv/TWiP. There's a little link in the show notes. Let's see.
We got more. More.
Dickson, you're next.
Denise writes, "Hi, all. I hope this finds you well. I'm a long-term listener from an at the moment gloriously raining Blighty, and wish to hazard my first semi-educated guess in the case from episode 174, based on the enlarged organs, fever, and response to amphotericin. I would suspect visceral leishmaniasis, probably elephantum, based on the location. While I understood that further diagnostic tests could not be performed on this patient, would it have been possible to conduct an autopsy on one of the other children who had sadly already perished? From PD7, it appears that the parasites can be seen microscopically in biopsied material. I suspect that if not, there was very good reasons. That doesn't. How can I say this? I suspect that if not, there were very good reasons. That's a direct quote. But as a lowly biomed undergraduate, it is currently beyond my ken. Thank you all for producing such a fantastic show. TWiP always makes it to the front of my podcast queue, although the rest of the Twixt universe is never far behind."
This is written perfectly, Dickson. There's nothing wrong with any of it.
Did I misread it?
No, it's fine.
I'm not understanding it. That's the reason for it.
From an at the moment gloriously rainy Blighty, which of course is the UK, right? Okay. And I suspect that if not, there were very good reasons.
3 weeks in Romania will do that.
And it was beyond her ken, which is of course one's reign of knowledge or sight.
Yeah. Well, maybe you should have read that one then.
No, you can be taught, can't you?
I'm a very old dog here.
Daniel has written 2 letters in.
He has.
Gee.
Nice
these
going.
These are other Daniels, I must say.
Ciao, successful hosts. I'm a long-term listener and first-time tackler of a case study. Mm-hmm. I think we need to just do one a month. Let people do it, right?
Yes.
Twice a month is too much. I'll jump right in.
There's an argument. It's nice to see so many emails and so many responses.
First timers too.
For once, we get a chance to use our random table numbers to go.
I'll jump right in and
digits.
say that prolonged fever indicates the child was infected some months ago, and the chronic abdominal pain is likely caused by enlarged liver and spleen. The ineffectiveness of antibiotics and antimalarials rule out their respective target pathogen, Given the location, I think the culprit is L. donovani or L. infantum, causing Kala azar. Parasite in sandfly, endemic to Sudan. Has 3 to 6 month incubation, which fits. Explains the hepatosplenomegaly. Also, amphotericin used to treat explains the boy's recovery. This is actually the first time I decided I would do a little research and attempt to answer a case here on TWiP, and I had a lot of fun in the process. In fact, I stumbled upon a fascinating case study in the Saudi Medical Journal. An 8-year-old Yemeni boy presented with prolonged fever, hepatosplenomegaly, and diarrhea after performing a blood film. A full therapeutic course of anti-malaria and schistosoma drugs were administered, but the boy's fever, weight loss, and increased hepatosplenomegaly continued. Bone marrow aspiration was carried out, revealed Leishman-Donovan bodies, a mastigote form. This 8-year-old boy was currently suffering from Leishmaniasis, malaria, and schistosomiasis. Fortunately, he survived. I was complaining about having to run a few gels over the weekend, but after reading that, I'll do it with a smile. I really appreciate your podcasts. It's such a pleasure to listen to you all, so I was very happy to join the Patreon group. I'm only in the $1 a month club, but after my PhD, I'll hopefully be able to up that to a few bucks at least. I feel pretty bad because I've been listening to TWiP since we covered Plasmodium in my undergrad zoology course in 2009 or 2010. I think. Is TWiP really running so long?
It is.
Longest running show on Broadway.
That's right.
Science show, anyway. Anyway, you're worth more than $1 a month, but I'm a perpetual student. It'll have to do for now. I look forward to hearing the reality of the case study and taking part again. Sorry for the long email. All the best from very hot and humid Padova, Italy. Nice.
Interesting.
Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we do, actually.
Daniel.
Ben writes, dear members of a TWiPartite complex, I believe the boy has visceral leishmaniasis, most likely caused by Leishmania donovani. This diagnosis fits well with the symptoms, and additionally, amphotericin B works well against leishmaniasis without as many side effects as some of the other antimonial leishmania drugs. Visceral leishmaniasis also fits well with the child's location. According to the WHO, more than 95% of visceral leishmaniasis cases occur in only 10 countries, and Sudan is one of these 10. Sadly, many of the countries that have greater than 95% of visceral leishmaniasis cases have large and growing refugee populations and large numbers of internally displaced people, so it seems likely that the incidence of leishmania will grow amongst some of the world's most vulnerable people in years to come. Furthermore, it is predicted that climate change will significantly enhance the spread of phlebotomine sandflies in the future, and so leishmaniasis may be an emerging public health care issue in regions where it isn't currently. It seems to me that the influence of climate change on distribution of disease vectors is something that doesn't receive the media coverage it deserves. In the previous episode, Vincent said that I had not previously won a book, but I did on episode 170.
All right.
So I'm glad the random number generator didn't pick me last time. I'll reattach my details to this email in case they've gotten lost somewhere. It's a balmy 7 degrees Celsius in Adelaide today, and we've just had a weekend of wild weather, but you can never keep the sunshine away from South Australia for long. Thank you all for parasitizing my headphones on the daily commute. Regards, Ben, and he's in the Wilson lab, malaria biology lab down there at University of Adelaide.
Right. Adelaide's a beautiful city, by the way. I had an opportunity to visit that while I was on my sabbatical in Melbourne, and I had a great time. I guess I'm next. Mike writes, my dear professors, regarding the boy in the vignette with prolonged fever, hepatosplenomegaly, and abdominal pain, I would like to guess visceral leishmaniasis, also known as Kala-Azar. Given the setting of a refugee camp in the Sudan, a prolonged course, and several other refugees who succumbed from a similar illness, it is my first and only guess. VL ranks second only to malaria in mortality and is prevalent in East Africa. It has a high fatality rate without treatment, over 90%. Although we are generally taught to make the diagnosis before starting treatment, the doctors caring for this young fellow had few resources other than their experience, having failed to respond to antimalarials, which could also present similarly. Their next choice would be to treat for the next most likely fatal disease. Had they access to a laboratory, they would most likely have noted anemia, thrombocytopenia, leukocytosis, all nonspecific findings, and visualized the amastogote on a blood smear. More advanced diagnostic techniques, such as culture or molecular detection of parasite DNA, would have helped. In general, response to treatment is not a diagnostic test, as amphotericin is used to treat a variety of fungal infections, which can also cause fever of unknown origin, hepatosplenomegaly, and abdominal pain. However, there would unlikely be so many others dying of fungal infections at all at the same time. I would also like to recommend you on the excellent podcast. No, I'm not reading very well today. I would also like to commend you on the excellent podcast. I enjoy them all, but I especially enjoyed this episode, from the case to the fascinating paper on toxoplasmosis.
You really never read properly.
I should probably slow it down, and if I do, I can do much better. But we have so many that I wanted to go through them.
You don't need to speed up. It's okay.
Okay, I'll try to not to speed up next time. Joyrel writes. You're copying me now.
You know, just say, is there a better way to say that? Joyrel. Hello host. This is my first time trying a diagnosis. I am looking forward to hearing it read on the podcast. As Daniel was recounting the medical history, my knee-jerk response was malaria. All the symptoms fit and the Sudan area is at risk. Then he mentioned that anti-malarial medication did not work. So much for the easy guess. While it is possible that the patient was unfortunate enough to have a resistant strain, the clue that he showed improvement when treated with amphotericin suggests another diagnosis. As I am unfamiliar with the drug, I looked it up. Typically used as an antifungal, it can also be used to treat Leishmaniasis. According to WHO in 2017, a large percentage of new cases of visceral Leishmaniasis occurred in 10 countries, one of which is Sudan. The symptoms of visceral Leishmaniasis include irregular fever, enlargement of spleen and liver. Also, the symptoms have been going on for a while, and this was mentioned as an important clue in the Visceral Leishmaniasis video from Parasitic Diseases Lecture Series. Video number 8. These clues led me to the diagnosis of visceral Leishmaniasis. The improvement the patient showed after treatment is likely the only proof of diagnosis given the limited resources of the refugee camp. Case studies like this make me appreciate the healthcare system that I usually take for granted. As a Canadian, I'm fortunate to have access to diagnostic tests and a wide variety of treatment that so many do not. All right, Daniel, you're next.
Rhonda writes, hello, TWiP. I would like to throw in my guess for case 174. I think the most likely diagnosis is visceral leishmaniasis. The patient comes from an endemic area and presents with symptoms suggestive of visceral leishmaniasis, including tachycardia, hepatomegaly, and splenomegaly. Neither broad-spectrum antibiotics or antimalarials improve the patient's condition. However, the child improves while taking amphotericin. I would love to win the signed copy of your book. Sincerely, Rhonda.
Right.
Dickson.
Christine writes, good day, gents. I am a super huge fan of your podcast. I listen to you guys while I work, cook dinner, clean house, and pretty much every opportunity I get, except for at dinner time because my boyfriend has forbidden it. LOL. That means lots of luck. The chemist.
No, it doesn't.
Laughing out loud.
For me, it means lots of luck. For you, it means laugh out loud. It means both. The chemistry, because it isn't defined, the chemistry between the three of you guys is great and makes for a very entertaining show every time. Never a dull moment. I love the way Dickson picks on Vincent. Oh, no, that's not how that reads. I love the way Vincent picks on Dickson. I get a good laugh out of it. I have a similar relationship with my best friend. I also love hearing Daniel's stories about sailing and hearing about your very smart kids. Barnaby is a fantastic name. Love it. I work as a receptionist for an oil field company, but have a wild love for all things parasites. I love TWiV and TWIM, but I wanted to finish all of the episodes of TWiP before diving headfirst into the other podcasts. Almost there. I have about 20 to go before I'm all caught up and waiting each month for the next episode. I had to listen to 174, though, because I want to take a shot at the diagnosis and hopefully win an autographed copy of the book. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We've had pretty much a rainy season instead of summer this year. Today is a cool and cloudy day at 11 Celsius with a mild wind, and so far no rain yet. I had to do a bit of research in order to come up with my conclusion, and I'm 95% sure that I have it right. I'm going to go with visceral leishmaniasis. According to WHO in 2017, 95% of all new cases of this parasite have occurred in 10 countries, Sudan being one of them. The parasite is transmitted by the female phlebotomine sandfly, who feeds on blood to produce eggs. Poor diet results in a full-blown infection, and the symptoms are enlargement of the liver and spleen, anemia, irregular bouts of fever, irregular heartbeat, and weight loss. Left untreated, this infection sadly results in death. Liposomal amphotericin B has been used increasingly to treat this parasitic infection and is the treatment of choice for immunocompetent patients in the Mediterranean region. A total dose of 20 milligrams per kilogram is effective in these immunocompetent patients. Whew. I hope I'm right about all of that. LOL. What does that mean again? I tried to keep it short, but it didn't work out that way. I'm happy to hear that the young man began to recover after receiving his treatment and that they can prevent future deaths now that they know what the illness is and how to treat it. Live long and prosper, she gives in the Dr. Spock. Mr. Spock symbol, your biggest Canadian fan, Christine. P.S. If I do by some chance win the book, which I doubt because I never win anything, I would love it if all three of you signed it for me because I love you all equally. That's sweet.
It's funny.
I have nothing else to say.
I've been to Edmonton.
So have I.
Have you, Daniel?
I don't think I have ever been to Edmonton.
It's a lovely place. It has a huge indoor shopping center and a fantastic hospital. And actually, I went fishing west of there. We went up into the mountains and did some nice fishing.
What's the other big city up there?
Alberta is got Calgary.
Calgary. I've been to Calgary.
That's not even close to Edmonton.
I've spent time. I almost got in a bar fight in that town.
Did you
I can't
really?
believe it. I can't. Believe it.
But it was, it was recreational bar fighting, and I was just like, "Oh, sorry guys, I'm just kind of done in." And they're like, "Oh, no problem. We'll move on to the next table and beat them up."
Okay.
It was not.
Was that during the Calgary Stampede by any chance?
It was late August one year. I was up there.
Right.
Beautiful place.
Yeah, it is actually.
I've been to Edmonton, Grand Prairie, which is even further north.
That is really far
and
north.
Calgary. My wife has family out there.
Cool.
That's why. Cool place.
And Crow's
oil.
Nest.
Oil. She's working for. Yeah, they have oil out there.
There's shale oil, et cetera, et cetera.
Alex. No, is it Alex? Yes.
Yes.
That's the last one.
Yes.
Hello, TWiP gang. This is my first time writing in, and I hope I'm not too late in replying. I can't believe it took me this long to find this podcast. I have been an avid parasite lover since I was little. I guess I've had my head in books a little too much and haven't been surfing the web enough. For this case, I would say this young boy has visceral leishmaniasis, a.k.a. Cala-Izar, caused by a species of the Leishmania parasite transmitted from a member of the sandfly family. The two main things that led me to this diagnosis were his enlarged liver and spleen and the improvement of his condition after an intravenous amphotericin treatment. I knew that amphotericin is generally used as an antifungal medication, but the boy's lungs were clear. I didn't know that amphotericin is also used as an antiprotozoal, and now I know. VL shares many symptoms with malaria and is often misdiagnosed, which explains why they treated him with antimalarials to no effect. It's unfortunate that the camp has limited resources. I would recommend an HIV test since HIV-VL co-infected individuals have a great likelihood of presenting VL symptoms. Provides a reference for that. And a greater likelihood of treatment failure and relapse. The CDC reports that an HIV-positive individual has 100 to 2,300 times greater likelihood of getting VL, and once they are infected, the likelihood of being symptomatic and having treatment failure is higher. If the child continues to improve after his treatment, I would hypothesize that he is not HIV positive. The reappearance of his symptoms would be cause for concern. It is very difficult to treat VL successfully in immunocompromised HIV-positive individuals, especially with refugee camp resources. I did not intend to end on such a sullen note, but alas, that is all my brain has conjured up for now. Thanks for the great case. Can't wait for the next episode, Alex. Wow, we had over 15 guesses, maybe a record.
I would say.
Amazing.
We didn't have too many people that guessed anything else but that either, so they must have really read that PD7 edition.
That's it. Everybody got it. And
did.
It's all your book. And the videos, apparently.
That's the whole purpose.
You're teaching the world parasitism.
We love it. We love this.
I guess that's the purpose, right?
That is the justification.
Daniel, any comments?
Well, I wanted the last two guesses to come in before I made my comment. So I think Vincent, Dickson.
Oh,
are you going with the?
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
For me, it was the hepatosplenomegaly because I can just hear you on your lecture and Daniel many times talking about that.
The double spiking fever. That's a pretty. That's a big clue. For sure, it's not malaria because malaria doesn't have that kind of a pattern. And it could have been undulating fever, right? Could have. But
well, I'm impressed with everyone. There was a case a few years ago at Columbia that I sort of heard about, after the diagnosis fact. And it was interesting. It took a little bit of a while. And it was a young boy, similar in age, from the South Sudan, hepatosplenomegaly. And when they were presenting it, I'm like, must be something more interesting because it seemed to me so obvious that it would be visceral leishmaniasis. And then they do the bone marrow. And I was like, oh, okay, yes, it is.
Right.
But so I have to say, like, this may, a lot of our writing, this was so obvious. So, but, when you're outside of the context and no one has told you ahead of time it's going to be parasitic or you're not practicing in an endemic area. So hats off. I'm glad that people made the, hey, malaria till proven otherwise, which is how this was treated. But yeah, so my buddy, Sam Makoko, was actually working in this refugee camp I think he was there for about 2 years. And the nice thing about this case was, he came there and several boys had died. And then he saw this one boy. And, as I think everyone said, that this came to mind. We think it's this. He thought enough to say, let's reach out. They reached out to Doctors Without Borders, who supplied them with the 10 days of amphotericin B. And they treated this boy for 10 days and he got better. And then they went on to treat dozens of actually young men. And, from 95% mortality from a lot of these young men dying, they were actually able to effectively treat a lot of these young men. So really nice, we won't end on as sullen a note as our last email. Pretty positive note. But unfortunately, as our emailers have written in, this continues to be a problem. If anything, the refugee crisis is growing throughout the world. And whenever you have people living in these settings, it's really, unfortunately, a perfect setup for visceral leishmaniasis, a lot of these other diseases.
I'm afraid so. I would agree.
All right, let's give away a book.
Let's do it.
We'll have a new random number generator today because my old one's not working, but it's Google. You ready?
Sure.
Google's broken.
Between 1 and 15, number 14.
Really? Wow.
That would be Christine from
Canada. Right. She's now our biggest fan.
She's the one who never wins anything.
Right.
It's rigged.
Whoa.
Must be rigged, this damned Google thing. Did Christine hack it? Maybe she hacked it.
Oh, we don't know.
Anyway, please, Christine, send us your address. That is TWiP@microbe.tv. I'll need your phone because it's shipment to Canada, but we'll get it up there. I have kind of a backlog of books to send out, but I'll get to it.
She wants you to sign the book too, Vincent.
Oh, me?
She does.
I'm not a parasitologist, though.
Yes, you are. You study very tiny parasites, viruses.
All right, I'll sign it too. I will sign it.
She requested it.
Not an author, however, I will sign it.
She knows that.
Usually only authors sign books.
Could be.
That's fine. All right, now moving onwards, we have a really cool paper.
Yes, today, this is a good one.
Which will...
Not that they all aren't, but this is
make you think differently about antibodies.
Right.
It's published in Cell. Human antibodies that slow erythrocyte invasion potentiate malaria neutralizing antibodies.
Right.
Cool.
Yep.
Big group out of University of Oxford, the Burnett Institute, Seattle Children's Research Institute, NIH, the Wellcome Sanger Institute, Expression Biotechnologies, which is a very cool name because the expression has 2 S's in it, but they have S squared instead of writing the 2 S's. Is that geeky?
I like that.
A little geeky.
I knew a virologist. Actually, I still know him. Roland R. Ruckert. He used to go by R cubed. And you, Dickson, could be D cubed.
I have been D cubed many times.
Did it hurt?
It's better than being D square.
Be there at D square. First author is Daniel Alanine, which is wonderful. Another great name. Alanine. Get it?
Got it.
I wonder if anyone ever says to him, what's alanine? It's uncharged amino acid.
It's a proteinaceous remark, if I ever heard one.
So Alan Dove, sometimes we say, are you alanine? But now here's the real alanine. I'm sorry. And this guy's name is Daniel on top of it all. Daniel G.W. Alanine.
That's great.
And the last author is Simon Draper. And there are lots of people in between.
There are, including Carol Long. I know her.
Yeah.
Yep. She's now at the NIH.
So here's the thing. People are trying to make a malaria vaccine, right?
Right.
It's been, as they say, it has proved challenging. And what they're trying to do is target the invasive merozoite, correct?
Yes.
Dixon and
Yes.
Daniel,
Yes.
would that make sense, right?
Yes.
Yes.
But hasn't done well. For a variety of reasons, hasn't done well. So people need to identify new immunogens that might block infection.
Exactly.
And so key part here, right, is the cyclical infection of blood cells. They want to try and block that stage. And there turns out to be a protein on the merozoite. It's called PFRH5, P-falciparum reticulocyte binding protein homolog 5. Sorry. Are you okay with that, Dickson?
I'm very okay.
You're looking puzzled.
No, I'm not puzzled. I read this paper and I got very excited.
They don't know the function of it, but so the protein is needed to establish a tight junction between the parasite and red blood cells. So they're thinking this could be a good target, right?
Yes.
So this is the protein that is the subject of this paper. They can produce the protein recombinant in cells. It doesn't have a lot of natural immune pressure. It doesn't vary all that much. Little sequence diversity.
That's right.
And
I think that was important. They talk about the fact that usually you don't get a lot of neutralizing antibodies, so this doesn't have a lot of pressure to start to mutate on us.
That's right. And they can measure, this is important, they measure the efficacy of their antibodies using what they call a growth inhibition assay.
Right.
And this is in vitro, and they say it correlates with vaccine-induced protection in non-human primate malaria models.
Right.
Okay.
Could we have room for a little backup information here?
Oh, yes, of course.
So
Certainly.
Part of the mystery of malaria used to be, how does it enter the cytoplasm of a red cell? And the answer is it doesn't. It just looks that way. And what it does when the merozoite encounters the surface of the red cell is it dances around a little bit. It doesn't actually point its apicomplexan end towards the membrane of the red cell to begin with. It sort of feels its way around the surface of the red cell. And that's this delay that this vaccine is taking advantage of. The fact that the parasite doesn't immediately go into the cytoplasm of the red cell. Well, in fact, it never does get into the cytoplasm. What it does is it causes an invagination of the cytoplasmic membrane of the red cell. Imagine that, Vincent, because this is an anucleated cell and there's no metabolism for membranes going on inside the red cell. So where does that extra membrane protein come from? And so we don't know the answer to that, but we do know that the parasite takes its time getting inside of a red cell. It's not an immediate process like you would witness, for instance, with, I don't know, maybe some viruses get in pretty fast after they attach to the surface, right? That induces a signal transduction event and then they invaginate and they're inside inside the cell. In this case, though, it has to sort of position itself. And that's where this molecule that they're going to take advantage of exposes itself to the attack. And if you can just slow it down even more, well, I don't want to, that's not a spoiler alert. That's the background. And you can use Nomarski phase interference microscopy to actually observe these events. And I knew someone at Columbia. His name was Henry Fremont. Henry Fremont eventually ended up at Stroudsburg State Teachers College, but he worked in Louis Miller's laboratory here when Lou Miller was still at Columbia University. And Lou Miller became the head of the parasite laboratory down at NIH for the malaria parasites. And he worked on how no one even knew what it looked like. And he did all the original work using Nomarski interference microscopy to show how it actually penetrates down through or induces the membrane to invaginate. That's basically what's going on. Okay.
Stroudsburg State sounds like a prison.
Well, I'm sure the students don't look at it that way at all. It's a lovely regional school in eastern Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too. So they actually, in this paper, you sort of jumping, but we'll bounce back and forth. They figure 7. They actually show these images, and they give you this time where normally we're talking about a 25-second invasion time from sort of the point of contact to. I remember you guys had a fight about this one time, that like the fact that I think I was distracted. the fact that so the AP complex, it doesn't actually enter the cytoplasm, but it gets inside the cell, but it's still within its own, it's still outside of that.
Yeah, anatomically speaking, it's outside, but it looks like it's inside.
And so it's interesting because, as we'll get to, you have this 25 seconds, you have a critical period of time.
That's right.
That, as we're going to see, if you can slow that down enough, then you can actually expose potentially other epitopes, which then can be targeted by immunoglobulins. So,
Daniel, it sounds as though the parasite has to activate its rope trees and its micronemes in order to actually go in. And it does so by rubbing itself on the surface of the membrane in some way, like a cat being petted by its owner. And that's where the antibodies are really going to start to affect the ability of the parasite to get inside the red cell, or to it cause this invagination, I should say.
Yeah, they talk a little, but some of the ideas are that you may have this direct interaction, right, between BSG and the PFRH5, but there probably is a whole complex that has to form.
Exactly.
So, and it probably does involve the ROP trees.
Right.
And
you said rope tree.
I said rope trees. Rope trees, that's right.
RHOP.
And there are carbohydrates that determine specificity of attachment also, like Duffy blood group, for instance, and that sort of thing. And that's what Lou Miller did some of his work on. And it wasn't the actual Duffy blood group, it was something next to it as it turned out. But nonetheless, it still had specificity for certain blood group substances that people either did or did not have.
And I think from sort of a big, we went right to the Merazoite invasion, but a lot of the other vaccines that I know we've talked a bit about target sporozoites.
Yes.
Stage was a very short little window to go at.
Exactly.
They haven't worked either. They haven't worked.
Yeah.
I know.
They've had trouble, right?
Yeah, they did.
Because
Lots of trouble.
How do you get a lot of these? Because the one that seemed to have the most success, you got to grow up all these sporozoites.
Right.
Inject living sporozoites.
Irradiated.
Irradiated,
That's
yes.
Right. That's right.
And then you're going to get a limited period of time that you have an immune response. And I don't know how you're supposed to, mass produce that. I know they're working on it. We're actually going to be looking at the Merazoite. So it's gone through the liver phase, right? Just to give people, you get bit by the mosquito,
right.
The sporozoites go to the liver. Now, after the liver phase, now you have this cycle where it just keeps invading red cells. And that's
exactly.
Where we're going.
And they can't go back to the liver. That's the other nice thing about this infection. That is, once it's out of the liver, it doesn't go back.
True.
And Plasmodium falciparum does not have a resting stage like the hypnozoite stage of Plasmodium vivax and ovale. So it's got real possibilities here.
I should add that these in vitro growth inhibition activity assays, the monkey tests have suggested that you would need a high concentration of antibodies against this PFRH5 in the order of 300 micrograms per ml.
That's
which
huge.
They say will be challenging to achieve. And so we need to do a little better. We need to understand the epitopes a little better. And that's what this paper set out to do.
Right.
And in the process, it stumbled upon a remarkable finding. So we start with isolating plasmablasts from volunteers, people who were enrolled in a trial, a phase 1 trial of this vaccine. So they're inoculated with the protein PFRH5 protein, and then they get B cells that are making antibodies, and they clone out the genes encoding these antibodies. And in fact, these individuals were immunized with adenovirus and poxvirus vectors to give them this epitope. How about that?
Yep.
We're putting in
TWiP.
Fusion, yeah. So then they clone out the genes and they produce the proteins in cell culture.
Right.
They make 17 different monoclonals. So these are human monoclonal antibodies. And here's a part that I think is so cool. They sequence these, right? And then they look in the human genome. And there is the sequence in the germline of humans encoding these antibodies. So, in other words, if you do this for HIV antibodies, you don't find any antibody sequences in the human germline. And I would say that's because HIV just entered this in 1920.
Right.
How long has malaria been infecting us? Before we were Homo sapiens, probably. Exactly. So it's had a long time to select for people with antibodies encoded in their germline. Isn't that cool?
Yes.
This was my favorite part, I have to say.
This is TWiVo.
This is this whole concept of natural antibodies and the idea that over evolutionary time, so millions of years, you get to the point where we have a germline sequence which has been selected by things that we commonly see. So, this is people are born with antibodies. Sharks are born with antibodies all the way back to there that target, phosphatidylcholine. Here we're seeing a moiety on malaria, certain antigens that are on pneumococcus and salmonella and E. coli. And so
I would love to know if Neanderthals have this sequence. I bet you they don't.
That's interesting.
Because they lived in Europe.
Northern Europe, but they didn't have any malaria in that area. They lived.
I would suggest it goes back even before.
You would. I would.
Yeah.
Well, we've got the complete sequence.
Probably before Neanderthals, so they'll have it just because they inherited it from their non-Homo sapiens ancestors.
Yeah,
it wasn't a long enough time to leave them. And I have it. You have it, and we don't live in a malaria-infested country, so
but it
takes time.
We don't throw things away that we can potentially use for some later date.
Oh, there's no thought like that, Dickson. Who knows? I mean, in a million years, you're going to lose it if you don't use it.
There you go.
All right, these antibodies, they did a little characterization. They seem to recognize a linear epitope, a straight sequence of amino acids. That's very cool, yeah, because then the protein should be enough to induce them, right?
Or peptide even.
They assay their ability to block. This is the GIA, this growth inhibition assay.
Right.
And all 17, they do titration curves of their blocking ability. And they have two that are very potent, number 16 and number 4. Those are not the stars of this paper, but we need to know those are the most potent. And some of them, of course, had no activity whatsoever. Which is very interesting. Then they said, let's test them in pairs to see if either compete with each other. And this way they could put them into 7, what they call epitope bins. A bin. I love the name bin as applied to a biological thing, right? Because when I think of bin, I think of a tin with bread in it.
Or a bottle of wine.
I never thought of it as a bottle of wine.
Bins. They have bins for all kinds of wines.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think of bins, Daniel?
I hate to say it, I think of flow cytometry. And I think of the way the data is put into
because you've done too much flow cytometry.
I think so.
That's right. And the data that you've discarded, of course, is put into has-beens.
Yes.
The bin is where the antibodies would recognize a close epitope, and therefore they might compete with each other. Mm-hmm. And so their conclusion is that the key target of the growth inhibitory antibodies are the ones that bind in the vicinity of an antigen called BSG, which is a receptor for PFRH5. All right. Not PF itself. So the ones that best inhibit antibodies are binding to this other epitope. A few other things that are quite interesting. They have a truncated form of the protein that was used for structural studies where they had to take off the N-terminus. Often that happens when proteins don't behave. You cut pieces off and then they behave. That sounds weird, but these epitopes recognized by these monoclonals are not there. So that means you can do structural studies on their epitopes and not worry about it. And so you don't lose any epitopes when you cut off the N-terminus. And that truncated protein is enough to induce these antibodies as well. So they say the rigid alpha helical core has all the major neutralizing epitopes that we need for this study. They next crystallize the antibodies in conjunction with the protein to map the epitope.
And they did micro X-ray crystallography. Micro X-ray crystallography. I don't remember ever hearing that before.
Now's the first time, Dickson.
Well, there's a first time for everything, but it used to be you had to draw a crystal that you could actually see. And in this case,
very small. You have to look at them in a microscope.
Indeed.
Yes, but that's good because it's hard to make crystals. In
fact,
kidding. The crystallography as a way of determining structure is going away.
Yeah.
Everybody does this now with cryo-EM.
Exactly.
For which one of our colleagues got the Nobel Prize,
Indeed.
Right?
Yes.
Joachim Frank. Okay. So they can map the epitopes on the protein that are bound by these antibodies. Mm-hmm. Now, if you mix antibodies together, do they neutralize the malaria in their assays, the growth inhibition assay? And they find that you can get antagonism between monoclonals that bind different epitope regions. And they say we have to keep this in mind when we vaccinate because we don't want to induce antibodies that are going to compete with one another. Right? That makes perfect sense. But if you didn't do this work, you wouldn't know that.
Right.
And then they do other combinations in this assay. They look in pairs that do not compete for binding. So they had before figured out these pairs of antibodies compete for binding. They compete for blocking infection. Let's try some of the other antibodies. And they had one antibody, number 11, which they say potentiated the inhibition of all 8 of the most potent antibodies. So this one had no neutralizing capacity on its own. It was not able to block infection. But when mixed with other antibodies, it makes them better.
Right.
And that is the sort of thing you wouldn't be able to predict. You just have to do the experiments.
Right.
Synergy.
There you go.
So then they say, could it synergize with antibodies directed against other merozoite antigens that we know are involved in uptake? Right? Mm-hmm. Yes. The answer is yes. Number 11. Yes. Number 11 can synergize with antibodies directed against other sites as well. So then they say, let's make a bispecific antibody with number 11. One arm is number 11. Remember, antibodies are these Y thingies, right?
Unless you're a camel.
Unless you're a camel and you have
that is true.
Thank God they're not working with camel malaria.
Camelid. Do camels get malaria?
Yes.
They do?
Sure. All mammals get malaria. There's a species for almost
every camel. Is a camel a mammal?
A camel is a mammal.
Isn't that a Dr. Seuss book?
Something.
So they make a bispecific antibody, and it works. They need half the molar concentration to achieve the same levels of inhibition. So that's cool.
That's very cool.
I guess you could use that therapeutically, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to induce those unless we modify humans to have those.
This may have great application once all of the drugs that are used against malaria are now become resistant, or the protozoans become resistant to those drugs. Then what are you going to do? You could use an antibody therapy.
Yeah. The problem is you have to inject those, right? Often intravenously. Those are like the Ebola monoclonals being used that were in clinical trials.
Oh, yes.
They worked, but they have to be intravenously administered.
Right.
And Daniel, that's probably not the greatest modality, right?
It's not. Yeah. It's, very expensive relative to these areas.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So then they said they had done some affinity calculations where they show that the greater affinity of the antibody is a determinant of neutralizing. And they say, so we thought maybe this number 11 just slows down invasion and lets the others do their thing.
The old 1-2 punch.
And so they do some live cell imaging, and they in fact show that it takes longer for merozoites to get into the RBC in the presence of number 11.
Right.
And their controlled monoclonal, an antibody against Ebola virus.
Right.
So the idea being that this number 11 slows them down and lets the other antibodies bind and neutralize. This is just brilliant.
It is.
Biology is brilliant,
Yes, indeed.
Daniel, what do you think?
I mean, I like it. They sum it up as we sort of started getting back to in their figure 7, where they look at this normal, we'll say, median invasion time of 25 seconds and pushing it out to more than 75 seconds. So more than, tripling it. Really, this is fascinating on so many levels. It's fascinating that these antibodies are coded in the germline. It's fascinating the complexity of the approach to antibodies. You're not just, here's this one antibody, neutralizes, we're done. The idea that one slows it down gives the other antibodies the opportunity. This is all great stuff.
Now, they end with a discussion of, again, the antibody titers that you would need to get this to work, and they say it's going to be challenging, and maybe we have to deliver the antibodies in a vector instead of immunizing people and hoping that they generate the right concentration of antibodies to be effective. But it's amazing that you take a non-neutralizing antibody and it just comes to the party and makes a contribution.
There must be other organisms that work that way too, then.
I'm not aware of any where it's been shown that the non-neutralizing helps slow down things so other antibodies can come in. It's almost altruistic. I'm not aware of other examples. There may be.
But it does. It raises the idea that you could use similar strategies in other apicomplex and other, parasites that are invading this way.
They say, to our knowledge, non-neutralizing antibodies that potentiate multiple neutralizing antibodies against the same and other targets have not been described for other pathogens. They have seen cooperativity and synergistic effects, yes, but these are quite unusual.
Nothing else gets into a cell quite the way this one does, though. That's the point, I guess.
It was an advertising campaign that was like that, right? Nothing cleans your sink like...
Nothing tastes better than a...
Comet.
Right.
Yeah, I think their quote is that this challenges the paradigm of structural vaccinology that traditionally sees the advancements of epitopes against which overtly neutralizing antibodies are directed.
Wow.
Exactly.
So it's a whole new idea.
Yes.
And as you bring up, Dickson, maybe it is unique to malaria, but you know what? Malaria is such a huge problem that's okay.
Sure. No, I totally agree. Agree.
And it's interesting because, I'm not as pessimistic as they are. I was a group in Cuba, actually, where there was an immunologist who's pretty famous among immunologists, Niels Urine.
Oh, yes.
Am I pronouncing that improperly, I hope? Yeah. And you're going to correct me, Dickson? Journey?
Not me. I won't.
Jerne. You're better pronouncing
Vincent,
things,
do you know the name?
What's the name?
Niels Urine, Jerne. And he had this whole idea that...
Of course I do.
An older immunologist.
So you probably learned when they still were teaching the whole idea of the immunoglobulin or antibody networks.
Right.
And so you produce an antibody at a high enough titer, it's a brand new protein. Your body's never seen it. So that induces other proteins to form. And then they're new, and
you mean
so on.
Anti-idiotype and idiotype and anti-idiotype.
You got it. You got it. Exactly.
A
and
mirror,
so,
looking in a mirror at yourself.
Yeah. So what this group in Cuba had done is they had taken an antibody, we'll call it antibody A, and then you produced antibody B, which bound antibody A, in sort of the unique area. And then an antibody C came along that would bind antibody B. But antibody B was similar enough to what you're trying to target in lung cancer.
Right.
So you basically were sort of, giving one antibody, which triggered down the road the antibody you wanted. So is there a way to, use the idiotype network and make antibody 11? And then it slows down invasion, gives your body the opportunity to produce neutralizing antibodies against now epitopes which are exposed long enough for the B cells to target. So.
Exactly. So the way I understood that network is that one of those antibodies that you've induced actually looks like the antigen. Because
that's
it's got
the idea.
It's almost like making a mold, and then you press another thing into the mold, and you get the same impression, but it's made from a different substance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great way to think of it. So antibody A looks like what you want to target.
Exactly.
Antibody B makes the mold. Antibody C, and then you end up with all these antibodies.
I think Urine produced that hypothesis in order to account for the fact that antibodies don't always go into production and always get made. Something has to turn them off. And this is the way to turn them off because they eventually peter out.
Yep.
So
urine was Danish.
Yes.
Well, at least it's a Danish name.
That's right.
And as I was told in Sweden, the Danes pronounce things differently. So, they all make fun of each other.
They do. This is true.
Someone from Finland said, the Swedes don't know how to respect personal space. And they're pretty private. So the Finns may be even more private. Anyway, urine is certainly not the way to say it because it's very complicated. But we will let someone correct us. What were you going to say, Dickson?
I'm older than all of you here. And I'm only pulling age on you now to let you know that I had the privilege of meeting some of the early world famous immunologists. And one of them was Gus Nossel.
You met Gus Nossel?
Yeah, I not only met him, I talked with him.
Did you meet Elvin Cabot?
I did, of course. And you did too, though. But you met him. And then I met Metcalf, who was another very famous immunologist as well, down at the Walter and Eliza. So, these people who started out not knowing everything that we know now, because we obviously have more technology available and that sort of thing, and we have more knowledge because of all the mistakes that everybody's made. They hone down the information and it allows us to get a clearer path to the truth.
I met Rolf Zinkernagel.
Oh, yeah.
I sat next to him in a taxi.
Caesar Milstein and I sat next to each other
We're dropping names here.
That's right.
How many Nobel laureates have you met?
Oh, well, I met all of them while I was at Rockefeller, so I've met quite a few.
They have the highest percentage of any place.
Yeah, when I was there were 12. I met them all.
Amazing.
Yeah. Only one refused to shake my hand.
He refused?
No, I was just joking.
Dixon, we need a hero.
If I could get online, I would give you one, but
you can't get online anymore?
Well, it says that I'm not online, so I'll try it one more time.
Kevin sent us.
Yeah, I noticed.
He said, "Dear TWiP Professor Maestros," attached to the PDF as a suggestion for a TWiP hero. I don't think he's been highlighted. His research on Kala-Azar makes him relevant for TWiP 174.
Would you please read that one then? Because I can't.
This is Sir Leonard Rogers.
I don't know that name.
As I browsed, this is Kevin. As I browsed through some historical information on Kala-Azar, I kept running across the name Leonard Rogers, who spent 20 years in India and made several contributions to tropical medicine in general and Kala-Azar in particular. He worked during a period of seminal discoveries in parasitology, and though he never grasped the golden ring, such as Ross did with his oft-cited 1903 British Medical Journal article, which synthesized Leishman and Donovan's observations on the likely cause of visceral Leishmaniasis. Prior to Ross's report, it was generally believed that Kala-Azar was a form of chronic malaria.
Yeah.
To quote his obituary published in the BMJ in 1962, Major General Sir Leonard Rogers, one of the greatest pioneers in tropical medicine, died in a Truro hospital September 16th at the age of 94. A living legend working to the end, Rogers was generally regarded by his service as its most outstanding member. He discovered the flagellate stage of Leishmania donovani, cleared up the role of entamoeba histolytical in the causation of amoebic dysentery and of amoebic liver abscess, showed that in emmetine he had a specific potent remedy for amoebiasis, demonstrated the efficacy of closed aspiration of amoebic liver abscess, and dramatically reduced the appalling mortality following open operation, worked out a rational means of dealing with snakebite, and performed pharmacological experiments to demonstrate the mode of action of snake venoms. His work on the effects of loss of fluid and salt from the blood in cholera and on scientific methods of replacement has stood the test of time and has saved hundreds of thousands of lives.
Wow.
His research on the prevention of cholera in pilgrim camps by mass vaccination is still the standard method of prophylaxis. Following the successful use of tartar emetic in Egypt and schistosomiasis by Christopherson and others, Rogers tried the salt in filariasis and Kala-Azar with dramatic success. In the latter disease, the foundation on which subsequent modifications of antimony treatment were laid.
Wow.
So we have a lovely document produced by Kevin, which includes other research accomplishments, his papers, and an eclectic sample.
Right. You know, if it wasn't for the imperialistic behavior of the British government, these people would have never succeeded because they wouldn't have had to worry about diseases of the tropics because they wouldn't have been there.
That's right.
So there are some positive,
That's right.
Unintended consequences that actually resulted in some good.
You're saying it is the silver lining in the cloud?
Well, it's if you do cost-benefit analysis, I think the imperialistic behavior still outweighs all of the good that came out of them. But, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. And now, Daniel, how about a new case study?
Oh, come on. We have another one now?
A new case study.
Really?
Yes, this is a recent one. I just saw a 70-year-old man born in India, emigrated to the United States in 1985. He reports that he's had frequent trips back and forth, but he hasn't gone back in about 2 to 3 years. And I'm called to see him. He's living here on Long Island, and he's admitted to the hospital with acute onset of fever, a little bit of a cough. He's not eating very well. And he tells me he was in his usual state of good health until the onset of this, which was about a week prior to me seeing him. He initially had gone to see a physician who said, it's a little bit of bronchitis. You'll be fine. But then his family found him down on the ground after he had lost consciousness. He was brought to the ER where he had a fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm asked to see him about 48 hours after he's admitted, and the quick I get is, he's probably got some hematological malignancy, but just, we've negative cultures for urine and blood at 48 hours, but this should be a quick one for you. So I go see this quick one, get a little more history.
Presume you're putting that in quotes.
He has a history of some kidney stones, history of diabetes type 2, history of elevated cholesterol, has had no surgeries, reports he's not allergic to any medications. Family history doesn't report any significant medical issues in the family. When they initially see him in the emergency room, they start him on vancomycin and zosyn. These are 2 broad-spectrum antibiotics. He continues to his treatment with insulin and atorvastatin. That's brand name Lipitor, cholesterol medicine. A little bit more background I get from this young man. He works in a post office. He lives with his wife in a private home. No toxic habits. And as I mentioned, he's born in southern India. He now lives on Long Island. He is mostly just to and from the office. He does give us a history of a hiking trip about 1 to 2 months prior to this incident, where he was up hiking with his son in Rhode Island. Otherwise, doesn't give us many other exposures. Doesn't report animals, no pets. give you his exam. So his exam is pretty unimpressive. He actually looks quite well, but his labs were a little striking. His white count is 7.6, which is in the normal range. His hematocrit, hemoglobin, so his hemoglobin has dropped down to 9. His hematocrit is 25. Just to give you a sense, that would be about a 13, 14 over 40 would be normal. And his platelets, normal platelet count is greater than 300, I'll say, 150 to 300. He's down at 39. He's got very low platelets. He's got anemia. And then I think that's about the sort of, let's see, his albumin 2.4. His bilirubin is up at 5.3. His liver enzymes are a little bit elevated, 142 and 46 for the AST and ALT. And his chest, it actually did a chest CT, which was clear. And he has a blood smear, which shows, I'm going to read these out as Vincent chops them down. Maybe people will. Anisocytosis, so they're not all the same size. Microcytosis, so some of the red cells are small. Polychromasia, so they're quite a bit of variation in the color of the red cells. There are teardrop red cells, Burr cells, and he has about 4.3% reticulocytes. Those are your brand new manufactured red cells. So I get this whole history, and he does report the fever, right, that we talked about. That was actually part of what brought him in, as high as 102. And I order one test. The hint, I order one test. I say, am I overthinking this? And I order one test, and 90 minutes later, I start treatment.
Bingo.
Modern medicine.
No, a marvelous educational background plus lots of experience.
I then go on to order some other tests, so we'll make it a little more. But no, that's what is going to get us to where I think we need to be. So that'll be my question for people, like putting this all together. We know it's a parasite, right? That's going to help us. We know I wasn't overthinking it. Zosyn is spelled Zosyn for people want to.
Zosyn.
Yeah, if people are going to look that up. And the vanco is vancomycin, so VANCOMYCIN. So people can look those up if they want. They also have a lot of things to look up with the indices for our red cells. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think this is a diagnosis people might get.
So when he went hiking, what time of year was it?
Well, so I just saw this gentleman about 2 weeks ago. So I'm seeing him in
summertime.
So it was in the spring, and actually,
spring.
Yeah. So let's say June that he was hiking.
That's summer.
Where did you say he was hiking?
He was hiking in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Okay. Exactly. How about his osmotic fragility test? Did you do one of those?
Right after the string test, young man.
Yeah. Well, no. That's okay. That may be old school, but
no. Still, actually, I'm joking, but we still for spherocytosis.
Yes,
we still can order osmotic fragility tests.
Right.
Is he HIV negative?
He is.
And was the parasite actually seen upon microscopy?
Well, you're suggesting what test you might want to order. But
you said you did order one test.
One test, and 90 minutes later.
90 tests. So why don't you do this, and then I'll get a call in 90 minutes, so and we'll know.
It's not a PCR test. It's not 90 minutes.
No. Could be.
90 minutes?
I don't know.
That's usually longer.
Don't know how long it takes to do a NAT test.
Hours.
Even if you order it stat?
Yeah, but it still takes hours to do. You have to run it, right, Daniel?
If they do it stat, 90 minutes would be about sort of the
hour and a half
quickest you might get.
Not a lot of cycles.
Yeah, no, 90 minutes would be, if they had they loved me and they put it in the machine right as I ordered it.
But they didn't do that, did they?
Well, yeah. All right, I know we're running long here.
We are.
But we have 3 emails. They're quick. Daniel, take that first one from Wink.
Wink writes, do you know what this is? That's a segmented moving worm of 40 centimeters. Nicaragua mission 5 years ago. No self-prepared farm fresh food. No seizures. Mild eosinophilia. Dr. Wink Weinberg. We got a little petri dish here. I don't know. Can you see what's in this little petri dish here, Dickson?
I can't.
Our cytologist on call.
I can't enlarge it on my screen, so I can't see it. Sorry.
Refresh your screen, Dickson.
Refresh my.
I just made it a little bigger. I
Did
can't
you?
tell. I can't. Yeah.
I have to go all the way back. Oh, wait.
Is it refreshing?
So I'll describe.
It's very refreshing.
Yes, I'll describe it for you, Dickson.
Please.
I wish I could see. I can't see well enough to tell whether it's
now it's bigger. Now it's
or
bigger.
flat, right?
It's now bigger.
It does start off with a thickened portion, which I'm going to say about a fifth of the body is thickened, and then it starts to taper down somewhat.
Right. There's still not enough detail in it to allow me to guess. Flat?
Oh.
Round?
Yeah, see, that's what I don't know. I can't
Segmented.
Looks segmented, but it could be pseudo-segmentation. If it's a nematode, it tends to, wrinkle like your finger when you make your finger like that. You see these little marks in your finger. That's what the cuticle does.
So 40 centimeters is pretty long.
It's pretty long as right. Sounds like the hint would be tapeworm, some form of, but if it's not flat, then this looks too. No, look at the shape of look at the shape of the object, right?
Yeah,
it's almost a perfect circle.
Yeah, because if I'm
going to tell you right now that tapeworms don't look like that when you see them in a petri dish. Sorry.
Yeah, because if you had, we'll turn into inches. We'll say 15 inches. It's kind of too long for most of your ascaris, and this doesn't look like ascaris, which would be more of a uniform.
But if it's not flat, then this is a free living something that's round, and that is pretty long.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is.
We'd need more detail.
Yeah.
You said segmented, but I would take exception with the segments. I think it's pseudo-segmentation. You could say earthworm. This is not an earthworm, but that's an oligochaete, and that's got segmentation. True segmentation, right? But again, it wouldn't assume that kind of a perfectly round shape. That's a perfectly smooth round shape.
What is?
The object. Am I not looking at the right thing?
No, you're not. You're looking at the dish that it's in.
Look at the brown. Look at that brown thing.
Oh, the brown thing.
Jesus, Dickson.
No, don't you dare do that to me. I can't see.
Brown and green.
I'm not. I was focusing on the donut and not the hole. I got it. Okay, now I see it. And again, still there's not enough detail in it, but it does have a more tapeworm-like shape in terms of the way one would lay out if you put it into a petri dish.
What kind of tapeworm?
Oh, it's anybody's guess. You've got
Nicaragua.
Got to look at the head. And who did it come out of?
Dr. Wink Weinberg.
It came out of himself.
He said he passed it 5 years ago.
I hate to say this. It looks like a mucus cast. Do you know what a mucus cast is?
No, I don't.
It's an artifact that's often mistaken for a worm.
Well, he's a doctor.
I know that. That's okay.
Says it was moving. So,
moving worm. He did say moving worm of about 40. That was 40 centimeters. If that's 40 centimeters, I need to see a segment and I need to see the head. It's like this,
right?
Yeah. I need to see the head.
Yeah.
So that could be, Hymenolopus nana, Hymenolopus diminuta. Those are worms that are about that length. This is the head of this worm looks pretty fat though. If that's the head that I'm looking at, then that's not a typical tapeworm because that kind of a tapeworm would have a tiny little head and the segments would get bigger as you moved back along the length of the worm.
I'm going with I don't know.
Yeah, well, I just seconded that opinion.
Do you concur?
I not only concur.
Not ascaris.
No.
Why?
I don't think so.
It's not. I can show you. I've got a jar of them out there. You know what an ascaris looks like.
It's not what?
It's not smooth enough and sinuous. This thing has more irregularity to it.
But they can be long, right?
But not 40 centimeters. 40 an ascaris this long would kill you. I mean, it would eat you alive. So I want to know if it's flat or round, and it's probably flat the way this thing looks. But I need much more detail on this.
Well, it's 5 years old that we didn't have good cell phone technology.
It's too late for that.
Okay, there we go, Wink.
Hopefully you don't have any more.
Dixon, you take the next one.
Anthony writes, T. Gondii and the house cat. In addition to the hygiene you mentioned, in parentheses, that I think to be routine for all, those with a particular concern should have the cat tested for infection. No active infection in the cat means maintaining vigilance, but no need for an immediate alarm. Most house cats now probably only know mice from their ancestral dreams, and so can't catch toxoplasmosis by consuming infected prey. Sad to relate, though, is the formal and informal practice of feeding felines raw food, including meat, which might have these pseudocysts in them. Home mixes will mean a cat harboring T. gondii. For this and other parasites and microbial pathogens, there is the interesting use of high-pressure processing, cold pasteurization. Done correctly, this method has been observed to render both oocysts and bradyzoites non-infectious. Whether the commercial products indeed are processed correctly would be something interesting to test. By the way, as a digression, I find it curious, considering the public health importance, that it's not known for certain how livestock become infected. I'm told that piles of feed can be contaminated with cat feces. Why doesn't someone check to see if this is actually the source? If it is, why aren't handling methods put in place to eliminate that? Those are good points. Yeah. By the way, I spent my time in Romania with someone from the United States Department of Agriculture, and he tells me that Denny Zarlenga is my source of information, that they now cannot work on toxoplasma at all. They were prevented from working on it, even though they promised not to use cats. Apparently nobody trusts the USDA, and so they said, no, you can't work on it no matter what. That's too bad, because we now have a way of getting around that with the mouse, right?
Okay, one more. Daniel, can you take that last one, please?
Certainly. Christine writes, good day. It's me again. LOL. That's laughing out loud. I just got to TWiP 172 listening right now, and you just read my first email from a couple months ago. I just want to say I love you too, Daniel. Thank you. I was, still a little bit. As Vincent assumed, I had not reached the episodes where you became a part of the show. Once you started reading my email, I realized I repeated myself a bit in my diagnosis email. Hoping you're all having a great day. I just wanted to make sure Daniel felt the love too. Christine.
That was
great.
Very, very
Thank
nice.
you.
Very nice.
Christine. I am very sensitive.
Yes.
So was Dickson. Right. So was Dickson.
Oh, particularly so. You keep picking on me. That's why. Come on, Vincent. You know why.
Tough. You're going to keep getting it.
I know.
All right. TWiP is at microbe.tv/TWiP. If you listen on your podcast player, please subscribe so you get every episode. We know how many people are listening. If you really like what we do, please consider supporting us financially. You can give as little as $1 a month over at microbe.tv/contribute. It would really help us with our expenses and our travels. Questions and comments, TWiP at microbe.tv. Daniel Griffin's at Cornell. No, he's not.
Cornell?
Daniel Griffin.
That's where you went to school.
Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thanks, Daniel.
Pleasure as always.
Are you worried about your boat with the upcoming storm?
She's a good boat. I'm not worried.
I took down my jib and my my boom the other day.
Okay. Yeah, I may strip the jib after I race on Thursday night, so we'll see how it goes.
It's cutting it close.
But you have good wind.
Dickson Despommier is at Racaniello.org, thelivingriver.org. Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome, Vincent.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I want to thank Ronald Jenkins for the music, ASM for their support. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP.
It's
parasitic.